Ever get the feeling that no matter where you go in the world, there's this one language everyone seems to understand?
You mean like music?
Well, yeah, but I was thinking more like facial expression.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like a smile's a smile, right? Doesn't matter where you are.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be diving into today.
This should be fascinating.
We're going way back to 1971 for this one. There was this groundbreaking study done by Paul Ekman and Wallace Friesen.
Those names ring a bell. Weren't they like pioneers in facial expression research or something like that?
Absolutely. Real trailblazers. And for this study, their research took them all the way to the highlands of New Guinea.
Wow. Talk about adventurous field work.
Right. They were studying the four people, a remote tribe, living a Stone Age lifestyle. Basically no contact with the outside world.
I'm guessing no internet or smartphones back then.
Nope. Totally isolated. And that's exactly what made them so fascinating to Ekman and Friesen.
I can see why. It's like a perfect natural experiment to see if these expressions are truly universal.
So what exactly were they trying to find out?
Well, the big question was, could the four people with zero exposure to Western media or facial expressions understand the emotions conveyed on the faces of Westerners?
So, like, could they look at a picture of someone smiling and know they were happy even though they'd never seen a Westerner smile before?
Exactly. And that's just one emotion. They were looking at 6 basic ones: happiness, sadness, anger, disgust, surprise, and fear.
That's quite a range. I'm guessing they didn't just flash random photos at them, though, right?
Definitely not. They used photographs of Westerners expressing each emotion.
Ah, okay. But how'd they explain what the emotions even were?
They got creative. To make sure the 4 people understood the emotions, they created these stories to go with each photo.
Stories.
Yeah, they used situations and concepts that would be familiar to the 4 people's culture.
Give me an example.
Okay, so to convey fear, they told a story about a wild pig at the door of a house, emphasizing the person inside had no weapons.
And then they showed them a picture of someone looking scared.
Exactly. They'd asked the 4 people to match the photo of the fearful face to that story.
That's pretty ingenious. I mean, did it work?
The results were amazing. Both adults and children from the 4 tribe were incredibly accurate at identifying the emotions in the photographs.
Wow. So even with totally different backgrounds, they could still read each other's emotions.
It seems that way. It really makes you think about how deep-rooted this ability might be.
So you're saying it's not just something we learn from our culture.
That's what the research suggests. There seems to be a strong biological basis for recognizing these core emotions.
But if that's the case, why do we still sometimes have so much trouble understanding each other?
That's where things get even more interesting. While the foundation might be universal culture, definitely adds another layer of complexity to how we express and interpret these emotions.
So like a smile doesn't always mean happiness everywhere.
Well, a smile is usually a good sign, but yeah, there are all sorts of cultural nuances that come into play.
Sounds like there's a lot more to unpack here.
Oh, definitely. We've only just scratched the surface.
Okay, so we left off talking about how even though facial expressions seem to have this universal basis, there's still this cultural layer that adds a whole other level of complexity.
Right. It's like you said. A smile might not always mean happiness everywhere you go.
Exactly. So how does culture actually change things?
Well, think about it this way. Even though we might recognize the same basic emotions across cultures, the way we express them, the way we interpret them, even the rules about when it's okay to show certain emotions can be totally different.
So like in some cultures, it's totally normal to be really expressive with your emotions, while in others, it's more about keeping things toned down.
Yeah, that's a great example. And it's not just about how much emotion you show. It's also about things like what situations call for certain emotions or what kind of facial expressions are considered appropriate in different social settings.
So it's like we're all speaking the same language, but with different accents and slang.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And just like with language, those subtle variations can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings.
Can you give me an example of how this might play out in real life?
Sure, imagine someone from a culture where it's considered rude to openly express anger, interacting with someone from a culture where showing anger is more acceptable.
Oh, I can see how that would lead to some awkwardness.
The person who's not used to seeing anger displayed so openly might be really offended or upset, while the other person might have no idea they've done anything wrong.
Yeah, it's like they're playing by totally different rules.
Exactly. And these cultural differences aren't just limited to how we express emotions, they also influence how we read the expressions of others.
So how do we avoid these kinds of misunderstandings? Do we need to become experts in every culture's emotional etiquette?
That would be pretty difficult.
Hmm.
I think a more practical approach is to try to be more mindful of the context.
Context.
Yeah. So instead of just focusing on the facial expression itself, we need to consider things like the person's body language, their tone of voice, and the overall situation.
So like a frown doesn't always mean someone's angry.
Right. It could mean they're concentrating or feeling sad, or maybe they just have a headache. It all depends on the context.
It's like those optical illusions where you can see the same image in two different ways depending on how you look at it.
Exactly. It's about seeing the bigger picture,
Yeah.
not just the isolated facial expression.
This is making me rethink all those times I've tried to figure out if someone was lying just by looking at their face.
Ah, the classic lie detector test.
Yeah, right. But didn't Ekman actually do research on deception too? I mean, is there really a way to spot a liar just by looking at their expressions?
That's a tricky one. Ekman did delve into the world of deception, and while there are some subtle expressions that might be associated with lying, they're really hard to catch.
Wait, are you talking about those things called microexpressions?
You get it. Microexpressions are these super quick, involuntary facial movements that can flash across someone's face for a fraction of a second.
So like if someone's trying to hide their true feelings, a microexpression might give them away.
In theory, yes. But in practice, it's incredibly difficult to spot them reliably.
So there's no foolproof way to tell if someone's lying just by looking at their face?
I'm afraid not. People are pretty good at controlling their facial expressions, and even the best lie detectors can be fooled.
So all those TV shows where they catch the bad guy based on a tiny twitch in their eye, that's all Hollywood magic.
Pretty much. Ekman's research suggests that relying solely on facial expressions to detect lies isn't very effective.
So what should we be paying attention to if we want to get a better read on someone?
Instead of just focusing on the face, try to take in the whole picture. Their body language, their tone of voice, any inconsistencies in their story. And honestly, sometimes the best approach is just to trust your gut.
So if something feels off, it probably is.
It's worth paying attention to those feelings for sure. But it's also important to remember that everyone is different. Just because someone acts a certain way doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. There could be a whole host of other reasons for their behavior.
That's a good point. We don't want to jump to conclusions.
Exactly. Sometimes the best way to figure out what's really going on is to simply ask.
Have an honest conversation.
Right. Communication is key.
Okay, so we've talked about how culture shapes expressions and how tricky it can be to spot deception just from someone's face. But what about this idea that our own facial expressions can actually influence our emotions?
Ah, you're talking about the fascinating world of facial feedback theory.
That's the one.
Ah,
It sounds pretty wild, like something out of a sci-fi movie.
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But there's a growing body of research suggesting it's more than just science fiction.
All right, so let's talk about this facial feedback theory. You're saying that if I force myself to smile, even when I'm feeling down, it might actually make me feel better.
That's the basic idea. It might sound a little counterintuitive, but there's a growing body of research to support it.
Okay, but how does that even work?
Well, it all comes down to the connection between our facial muscles and our brain.
So like when we feel an emotion, our brain sends signals to our facial muscles to create the corresponding expression.
Exactly. But it turns out that connection goes both ways.
So our facial muscles can actually send signals back to the brain.
You got it. And those signals can influence our emotional state.
That's pretty wild. So even if I'm not genuinely feeling happy, the act of smiling might trick my brain into thinking I am.
In a sense, yes. It's like a feedback loop. Our facial expressions can reinforce or even alter the emotions we're feeling.
So if I'm stressed out and I force myself to relax my face and maybe even crack a smile, it might actually help me calm down.
It's certainly worth a try. And it's not just about smiling. Any change in our facial expression can potentially impact our mood.
So like if I'm feeling anxious, I could try unfurrowing my brow or softening my gaze.
Exactly. Even subtle adjustments like that can make a difference.
This is blowing my mind. It's like we have this built-in mood regulator right on our faces.
That's a great way to put it. And the more we learn about facial feedback, the more we realize how much potential it has.
So it's not like a magic cure-all, but it could be a really useful tool for managing our emotions.
Absolutely. Think about how helpful it could be to consciously adjust your facial expressions in different situations.
Like being able to calm your nerves before a big presentation or boost your confidence before a job interview.
Exactly. Or even just shifting your mood from grumpy to grateful on a tough day.
Okay, I am definitely going to start experimenting with this. It's like we've been given this amazing gift, but we haven't fully realized its power.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. We often underestimate the connection between our physical body and our emotional state.
Well, this entire deep dive has been a real eye-opener. We started with this amazing study in New Guinea that showed how universal some facial expressions are.
And then we explored how culture adds another layer of complexity to those expressions, and how tricky it can be to detect deception just from someone's face.
And now we've even uncovered this incredible power of facial feedback.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as a smile can have such a profound impact on our emotional well-being.
I'm definitely leaving this conversation with a newfound appreciation for the power of facial expressions. It's like we've unlocked a secret code to understanding ourselves and each other better.
And who knows what other secrets are out there waiting to be discovered.
Well, that's what these deep dives are all about, right? Exploring the fascinating world of human behavior and unearthing those hidden gems of knowledge.
Absolutely. And I can't wait to see what we uncover next.
Me too. Until then, keep those smiles coming. You never know how good they might be doing.